I feel the Spirit moving in me. I feel the Spirit moving in me.
So I have a question. Have you ever felt so hurt that loving again seemed impossible? You ever been there? I've been there. Where you thought, I just can't love again. Because you reached out, you did something, you shared your love, and didn't get back what you expected. So sometimes we can shut ourselves down, can't we? Wow. Well, what if I told you that moment could be one of the most powerful, important moments in your life? To make that choice, not to shut down. A number of years ago, I was at a Thanksgiving dinner at my friend Gary's house. And I spent many Thanksgivings here because my family kind of dispersed in one way or another. And so I always felt at home at his house with his family. And we're sitting around the Thanksgiving table, and the cranberry sauce is making the rounds, and everybody's piling this amazing food on their plates. When my friend Gary's brother leans over to me, and he was the one in their family who was kind of a man of few words, and he was quiet, and he typically watched what was going on behind thoughtful eyes. And he said to me, his voice low enough so I could only hear. He said, I heard that the professor in your English college class is giving you a hard time. That must be rough. What's going on there? And I remember feeling this jolt of surprise, not just because he knew about what I was struggling with, but that he cared enough to ask. And for a moment, I saw this door open and a chance to share the difficulty that I was having with this teacher and his dismissive comments that this teacher made to me. And a freshman in college, struggling with an English class and getting papers back from him that were dripping in red ink. And I was drowning in self-doubt. But my vulnerability felt too heavy for me to share at Thanksgiving, right? Felt like it was too real for me to share what I was experiencing with my friend's brother that I only saw at Thanksgiving once a year. So I quipped, I never had respect for those English people anyway. And I said it loud enough for the whole table to hear. I said, their food is bland and they drive on the wrong side of the road. Right? And people around the table all laughed. And I looked at my friend Gary, and he was giving me that smile because it was a smile that recognized that part in me that always was able to change the mood to make it happy, no matter what was going on. And I looked at Gary's brother, and I caught something else in his eyes. A flicker of disappointment before he nodded and returned to eating his Thanksgiving dinner. And the conversation then returned to football or somebody's new job. And the moment kind of dissolved into the warm background of a Thanksgiving dinner. And that moment became a moment that I returned to many times, right? Because I have had always been the one who has something funny to say, right? Instead of reaching out and opening my heart and being vulnerable, I would come out with some comic thing to dance around the fact that I didn't feel comfortable being vulnerable. I didn't want to have a meaningful conversation. Wow, and that I've remembered that conversation forever, and I hadn't thought about it for years until I started writing this talk. And even as I explained this talk to Emily, the story made me cry. Because I saw who I used to be. This wannabe comic who didn't want to be real, didn't want to be vulnerable, didn't want to be hurt, didn't really want to be heard. You know, I never got to tell my friend's brother about the professor who gave me a hard time. But I've tried to honor that moment by learning to stay open, learning to stay vulnerable, learning to stay present, and to recognize an open door when I see one. And instead of dancing around with humor, to check in with myself and be present in that moment. You know, that experience taught me something profound. That our natural instinct, maybe yours too, for self-protection often leads us to sacrifice the very thing that we need the most: genuine human connection. You know, there was a Harvard study that said that 36% of Americans feel lonely. Right? Here we are. We have the most ability to communicate in any time in history, and we struggle with profound isolation. Walking around with devices in our purses, on our pockets, or in our pockets, that can communicate with most of the people on the planet. But we are have this amazing fear of and experience of loneliness. And I think what is missing isn't contact, but it's courage. The courage to love. And that's what we're talking about today, is the courage to love. And so we're going to look at some things today that I hope helps you discover how can you open up and be a little bit more vulnerable? How can you open up and be a little more present? How can you open up and experience and be love? I don't think anybody would deny that what our country, what our world needs right now is love. And I wish to God some of the people that were in the Oval Office on a couple days ago could have heard this talk. You know, the very thing that we most desperately seek is a thing that terrifies us the most. Love. Being vulnerable. Think about someone who disagrees with your political views at Thanksgiving. Or think about yourself when you have made the same mistake for 5 times. And that's when love becomes less of a feeling and more of an experience that we can open up to. You know, we're sold this idea that love is primarily a feeling, something that happens to us. We glamorize the idea, and we say, oh, I fell in love. As if we tripped over some cosmic rock walking down the street. But the moments when it's hardest to love are precisely the moments when love has the greatest power to transform us. A friend once told me, you know, I'm really good at loving people from a distance, right? And isn't that the challenge? How can we love the people around us? How can we so much embrace the power of love that we are the power of love? I love what Rumi said, and you've probably heard this before. He said, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek all of the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Wow, can we do that easily? Right? No, what Rumi is suggesting isn't easy, right? Because the barriers that we have to love are the very things, the obstacles, the opportunities that we have to be the fullness that we can be in this lifetime. I believe this is why we're here. Is there anything else that's more important? Really? The biggest opportunity and sometimes the most difficult thing that we do is to love. You know, love is not something we receive. It's something we become. Someone said to me, "Well, but we're expressions of God. We are love." Yeah, that's true. And from that larger perspective, that is the truth. But what gets us to that place of being able to be love is to face the challenges and the obstacles, the barriers, as Rumi would say, to get there. So how do we cultivate the courage to love? I have 4 ideas. And the first one sounds really simple. Be present. Just be present. How many spiritual teachers have talked about being present, right? All of them, I think. You know, cultivating the courage to love with presence is the ability to be totally here, wherever you are, wherever that is, right now. Because if we're not present, we can't respond in a heartful, loving way to what's in front of us. So how do we do that? How do we become present? And what I'm inviting you into, of course, is to look at your experiences in your life and take these things I'm going to talk about today and experience them. So imagine you're with someone and you want to be present in that moment. A great place to start is to breathe. And not just the normal breath that sustains you. I mean, take a breath, right? And pause and be present right now in that moment. The second thing we can do is to listen without planning your response. Right? We have sort of this innate fear, don't we, of what am I going to say? Right? What are we going to say when they stop talking? So I know I find myself all the time thinking, what am I going to say? I could say this. I'm making a list, right, of all the things I'm going to say, rather than being present and just listening. And what I found is, if I stop making the list, I'm going to come up with this important stuff anyway, right? Because I'm going to be able to respond to what the person says. So listen without planning your response. So take a breath with me. Just be present. And the last thing that we can do to be present and to have the courage to cultivate love, is to be comfortable with the silence. Wow, we are so afraid of the silence. We have to fill it with something, don't we? Like it's this invisible void that shows up, right? Just you're in a conversation, you're sharing it with somebody, the conversation stops. Just be present. Just be present. You don't have to fill the void. And what's going to happen if you are in the silence? How's it going to affect where you are? You'll be present. When it's time to respond, you're more likely to respond from a heartful place, aren't you? Okay, well, that was pretty easy, right? So let's move on to the second way that we can cultivate courage, the courage to love. And this one is so important. This one is such a powerful part of conversation, and very few people ever do it. Right? Ask to know what truly matters. And I can think of a number of people in my life that I see all the time who have never asked me what's important to me. Who have never asked me, what are you feeling right now? These are important people that I spend time with. People who have never said to me, oh, I understand you like to play the ukulele. What kind of songs do you like to play? Never think to ask me. Right? So how far does the intimacy go? Does it happen? It doesn't happen. The people that we care about, that we love, that we share with, and the depth of, we're really talking about moving our conversation from being transactional to being transformative. We're talking about taking our relationships from a transactional relationship to a transformational relationship. So we do this by asking to know what really matters, right? Love isn't just about feeling deeply. It's about deeply understanding someone else. Do you see the difference? It's funny. You ever walk away from a party and somebody asks you, and Emily always asks me, well, who did you talk to that you enjoyed? And what did you talk about? And sometimes I have to think. Oh, we talked about football, or we talked about sports, or we talked about judging somebody for something that they said or did, instead of really talking about what really matters, and to ask open-ended questions. The question that we most often ask that nobody wants to know the answer to is what? How are you? Nobody gives a shit, right? They're not asking you, oops, did I say that? Nobody wants an answer to that question. It's almost like hi. When we say, "How are you?" Nobody cares, right? And most of the time, we can understand that because we feel like we don't really have the time or the energy, effort to get into an involved conversation. But if that person really matters to you, if you want to make a connection, then ask a question that really matters. You can even ask, what excites you, right? What turns you on? What makes you connected? What opens your heart, right? Take a breath. So the next thing that we can do is just to be curious, to be honestly curious about someone. To know, what is your life about, right? What do you care about? And not to fix it. I think that we think that we're all like conversational physicians, right? That we have to go into every conversation and fix somebody, right? What if we just listen to them? How many times have you got unsolicited advice, right? When someone just wants you to listen. Just listen. So don't be fix-it focused. And the last thing is just to listen before responding. To listen, take a breath, and then respond. So, asking is an act of humility, of courage, and love. When we make a habit of it, we unlock a deeper, more authentic way of being with others. And that's what we're talking about today is how can we be authentic, right? How can we be true emissaries of love in everything we do? And I have to say, I'm giving you a whole lot of information today. And, I could do a whole weekend workshop on all of this. I realized on the way here this morning. But all of this stuff is in the Walk Your Talk that I'll give, that you can take with you at the end if you want to review what we're talking about and apply these things in your life. Okay, and the third thing that we can do to cultivate the courage to love is to choose healing over holding on. Love is probably the most powerful tool that we have to heal if we use it. But if we're holding on to our pain, if we're holding on to our resentment, if we're holding on to past wounds or past transgressions, after all, we're justified, right? Isn't that what we think? Right? If I'm holding on to anger towards somebody, I'm justified, right? Isn't that what the ego tells us? But that very act of holding on is what keeps us separate. So much war and destruction and anger has happened on this planet because people are holding on to something that happened generations ago. And we do the same thing, something that happened years ago. Something somebody said, or something that you said that sounds like something that somebody else said. And we hold on to that. Sometimes the very weight of resentment that we are carrying is heavier than the initial wound. So, where do we start with this? And the first area is to recognize what you're holding on to. If you find yourself in judgment or in anger or in a conversation, look at what are you hanging on to that's keeping you from not being present in that moment, not loving, not opening your heart. And then to shift, and this is a huge shift, to move from blame to growth, right? If we're blaming someone for something, then we're in denial that we have some growth opportunities there. If we're blaming somebody else for the way we feel, or the way we are, or for our circumstances, then we think we're holding that person ransom, but who are we really holding ransom? Ourselves. You know, someone said that, I think you can picture this. Unforgiveness is like holding the doorknob of a door where somebody is on the other side that we don't like, thinking that that's punishing them. Right? But the truth of it is, who's the prisoner? We are. And the other person is on the other side of the door dancing and laughing, has no idea that we're holding resentment or unforgiveness against them. And that's the next part, is to practice forgiveness. To really practice what it means to forgive yourself for past things that you've done, and to forgive other people as well. You know, Jesus really had two messages. You know what they are? Love and forgiveness. If you want to be enlightened, love and forgiveness. If you want to live happily, love and forgiveness. Right? If you want to be totally present, love and forgiveness. It's simple, right? And we have a tendency to make it seem like it's so complicated. Okay, and the last thing that we can do to cultivate courage is to take the first step back. When something happens, we're feeling this resentment, we got some anger going on or whatever it is, and we've created some distance between someone that on some level we care about, is to take the first step back. Might just be send an email. Hey, I was thinking about you. And the next thing is really to own our responsibility, take responsibility for whatever has happened, and really to take responsibility for what? We're coming together, for healing it, for being the presence of love, for having the courage to love. This is easy, all this stuff, right? And of course, this is challenging, right? This is why we're here, I believe, in these bodies, on this planet, with all of this. I almost said another cuss word, but you know, I never cussed from the pulpit. Well, except when I'm really telling the truth. Right? And that, you know, sometimes speaking from the heart has a 4-letter word attached. You ever notice? To speak the truth means sometimes you have to put the shit on the table, right? We have to face that stuff to know that there's things that challenge us, and to be able to come from this place of love. That's really what this is all about, coming from a place of love. Recognizing, yeah, this is not easy stuff. It's a lot easier to believe in a God that all it wants to do is have you believe in it. That's a heck of a lot easier, isn't it? And that's a whole other topic for another talk. So, and the last thing is just to release the outcome. Right? We can always have the best of intentions, but just release the expectation and be in the moment to accept whatever it is. Sometimes we can convince people to turn around and love us, and sometimes we can't. And it's our job just to be present, to love unconditionally. Agape love means what? It's loving unconditionally. To be present to love. You know, taking the first step back isn't about winning or losing. It's about being the kind of person who chooses love even when it's uncomfortable. There's a great story that I like about Derek Black and Matthew Stevenson. You might remember that Derek Black was the son of the Stormfront leader, Don Black. Remember who he was? Derek Black was a rising star in white nationalism until a college buddy of his, Matthew Stevenson, said, "Hey, you know, I'm having a Shabbat on Friday night. Why don't you come over?" And so Derek was like, "Well, I don't know what that is." And he said, Matthew said, "Well, just come and be there and be present and see." And so here's this white nationalist going to a Jewish Shabbat, right? But what he experienced was so much love. And he saw the people that he opposed in a different light. And he was able to open his mind, to open his heart, to be present with these people. And I guess he went a number of times to Shabbat. And this act of courageous love by Matthew, inviting this white nationalist, Derek, into his home for this sacred ceremony, led Derek to renounce white nationalism. He has since become an advocate against racism, sharing his journey to help others understand the dangers of extremist ideologies. This story, to me, demonstrates how love can bridge even the biggest gap in the most extreme divides. You know, when we choose courageous love, something remarkable happens. It's like dropping a stone in a pond, and our actions create ripples beyond what we can see. You know, we have no idea how we can affect people's lives by being that presence of love. You know, I was in Costco one time, and I was in the produce area, you know, and not thinking anything about it. But this woman that I didn't know, I looked at her and I smiled at her. Didn't think anything of it. Years later, I went to the veterinarian, and she worked there. And she said, "You know what? I remember you." What? She said, "I was having a tough time in my life. And I was at Costco in the produce department, and you smiled at me. And it changed my experience in that moment. Just a smile. Wow. The courage to love." I began this talk with sharing a moment from a Thanksgiving table years ago. A missed connection that I had with a friend that I could never reclaim. One small choice to deflect with humor instead of opening my heart to the moment. I chose comfort and safety over the risk of vulnerability and being seen. The courage to love is like that. It happens even in moments that we just can't imagine. So many times for all of us, we have that opportunity to have the courage to love. Imagine a world where every person chooses to love over fear, chooses love over fear, chooses presence over distraction, chooses healing over resentment. A world where we didn't wait for others to make the first move, but instead led with open hearts. That world begins with us. That world begins with you. Love isn't just something we receive. It's something we become. And when we choose to love courageously, we don't just change our own lives. We create ripples of transformation far beyond what we can see. So the question is, what step will you take today to live with more courage? Let's say the affirmation together. I have the courage to love, and I become love. I invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath, breathing into this moment right now. And to breathe in and breathe out and move your awareness to your heart, to that courageous heart of yours, to that courageous inner being, to that courageous highest self that's calling for love. And to feel this desire moving like a ripple and a wave through you, touching every space, every tissue, every thought, every feeling, with the courage to love. Breathing in and breathing out. And to ask yourself again, what step will you take today, tomorrow, to love with more courage? And let's hold that thought for a moment. Breathing in and breathing out. And bringing your awareness back to this moment. To touch in with that courageousness within you. To embrace it, to embody it, to feel it, to love it, to have the courage to love. And so it is. Namaste. Anybody got any other ideas? All right, why don't we stand and we'll pray together the prayer for protection, and then we'll join together as a circle to hold hands and sing the peace song. So for ourselves, for this island, this congregation, this unity, for our government, for the world, let's pray together the prayer for protection, which begins. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. God bless you. Thank you for joining us on Facebook this morning.
Where I live, there